Hello, welcome, and happy National Coin Week. Thanks for joining us at the ANA's e-Learning Academy. My name is Andy Dickus. I am a museum specialist here at the ANA, and I also coordinate National Coin Week. This year's theme is Our Money, Our Heritage, Our America. And we're celebrating how numismatics tells the story of our country and helps form our national identity. Now, tonight we are in for a treat. Jim Licaretz has joined us to talk about the production process for his recent series of medals honoring a person that I have always had a lot of respect for, civil rights icon John Lewis. Jim Licaretz is a longtime medallic sculptor at the U.S. Mint. He was also a sculptor at the Franklin Mint, Mattel, and Artistic Solutions. He has served as a faculty member for the Fleisher Art Memorial in Philadelphia, the Otis School of Art and Design in Los Angeles, and the Academy of Art College in San Francisco. Jim's works are represented in numerous private collections and can be seen at the British Museum, the Royal Coin Cabinet, the National Museum of Economy in Stockholm, the American Numismatic Society, and the Smithsonian Institute. Jim was president of the American Medallic Sculptor Association and was a member of the National Sculpture Society in FIDM. He received the ANA's 2008 Numismatic Art Award for Excellence in Medallic Sculpture in 2008. Yeah. So, Jim, with no further ado, I'm going to pass the share screen to you and soak up all your good knowledge. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Look okay from your end, Andy? Okay. This whole project started kind of inadvertently with a conversation with Gene Daub, probably my closest and dearest friend, who's another sculptor and a very, very accomplished medalist. And it was around the time that John Lewis died, and both of us were just talking about how much we liked him, and especially how much we liked his head. You know, besides being a great man, he also had a series of shapes that kind of lended themselves for sculpture. There are some people who are really just better models than others. And Lewis was superb in the fact that he had these wonderfully bold and full shapes. His bags had bags. He was just a great, great inspiration as a series of sculptural forms. So this is how it started. I did a portrait in the round in a water-based clay. And after it was pretty much along the way, I decided to do the next step, which was to scan it. And here's a shot of the scanner. 3D scanners basically use a light to move across a form and record the form. This particular scanner, if you look at the files that it creates, it's basically a series of photographs, JPEGs and raw photographs. So you have to keep moving the model around because it makes a number of different passes. This is the software that is used to create with the scanner, to create the model using the scanner. All of those little tiny things at the bottom are a series of different views that the scanner has recorded. And basically, what I have to do is take one image and another one, and then using little placer dots, I align them. So again, all those little guys at the bottom made the final scan, which is what you see in the middle of the screen. And there it is from the front. And if you remember the clay, everything is there. It's a little more brutal looking because in some, just the view that the way the clay was lit probably didn't look as active on the surface. But here, really, you can see everything that's going on. When I said his bags had bags, I wasn't kidding. He just had great shapes. So there we go. That's the scan. Now, after you have the scan, you create a file. which is either an STL or an OBJ. They are files that really represent a three-dimensional object. And I basically use two different programs to do the finished modeling and to create the reliefs. Now, this one, what you're seeing here is the data, the OBJ in this case, opened up in a program called ZBrush. And ZBrush is a very, very good program that lets you go in and modify and really sculpt digitally. Indeed, there's no clay involved, but you are using a pen on a sensitive screen that is letting you go in and move around the surface, smooth it, put a texture on it. Anything that you need to do that you would do with regular clay, you can do now digitally with a virtual sculpture. Now, here's an example of what I was talking about. These little marks are ways I can go in and actually add a little bit of surface texture and refine things. There's no limit to what one can do with these programs in terms of enhancing the surface. So that's ZBrush. Now, this is interesting. This is just the head, because I didn't want the shoulders and all that bit for the first. I did 3 medals, and one of them I actually did use the whole bust, but in 2 of them I just used the head, which is enough, I think, for what I'm doing. So this is an example of what you can do in ZBrush, which is, again, one of the 2 programs that I use. There's a basin that I created in the back, and then here's the head sculpt in front. Now, what ZBrush lets you do, which is fairly new in this particular program, is let you position the sculpture in the round in front of a basin, in this case, and then with a simple command, you can make it a relief. This is new with ZBrush. It's about the last year and a half that this was done. So you can see from on the image that the basin in the back actually has a relief of the piece in the front. So there it is on the basin without the piece in the front. So right now I already have something that's starting to work out pretty well as far as the portrait and the placement. And I can also adjust the height if I want to with this program. I can make the relief higher or lower. And I found that with Lewis, the actual one I did at the end, which wasn't this one, I made a higher version, which I think worked better, again, because of his forms. Now this is the higher version. And another thing about ZBrush that's very handy is I can change the materials. So if I want to see what it looks like with a bronze patina, which is what I'm doing here, I can get some idea of how it's going to look at the very end when it's cast and patinated. Very handy. And also changing the colors of the materials in this particular program helps a lot, because certain materials reveal things and other materials hide them. So you're constantly going back and forth with materials. And here's the profile. Now this one, again, this was done in another program, which I'll be talking about, but I brought that one into ZBrush just to see what it would look like with a bronze patina. The other program that I'm talking about, which I'll get to shortly, is called Freeform. Now that one lets me do a lot of things, the lettering, the basin modifications, all that sort of thing I do with Freeform. And also this particular profile was created in Freeform. And in Freeform, what I did is basically take the whole scan of the model, cut it virtually right in half. So I had a profile, had half of it, and then simply told the program to compress all the shapes on that axis, in this case on the Z-axis, to 20% of what the original model was. And that's how this one was arrived at. This is higher than some of them, but again, Lewis worked well in terms of higher relief. Some people just lend themselves to more bold interpretations. Now, this is the other program. This one's called Freeform. Now, here you can see in some ways how I actually got to the final front piece. The gray pieces are inactive. There's nothing you can do with those. But the yellow one, which is what they're calling a clay color, is actually the active piece. Now, the middle one that just says John Lewis, you'll see a blue silhouette. So what I basically did with Freeform is trace a silhouette onto a blank and then tell the computer to incuse that whole area within that silhouette a certain amount. So I did that, and you'll see now on the right, the sculpture of the portrait is set into that incused area. And I also did the lettering. Freeform is very good in terms of allowing one to simply literally make up a template with the letters on it and take it into the program and then put the template where you want it and say, make the letters incuse or raised. And again, you can adjust the height. You can adjust the draft if you need it for production. When people are cutting things with mills, they need a certain percentage of draft so that so the angles are not steep. They're slow angles, because when these things are in production, dies are cut. And then when you're striking something, you have to have a lot of draft all around so that the pieces will release from the dies. So there's the whole thing together. That's the reverse. Again, I just did the quote that I wanted, took it in there and said, give me those letters at whatever height I wanted. And there's the obverse and the reverse together in Freeform. Yeah. Okay. And this is, again, I mentioned the profile. I did that also in Freeform. I took it into ZBrush, like I said, to look at it. But there's an example of just taking the head on the left, compressing it, and then putting it on a basin and putting the necessary lettering and information on it. There we are again in ZBrush, so I can see what it looks like. Now, after I have everything done with the modeling programs, the next thing is to make a print. So basically, the things that you just saw are saved again as an OBJ or an STL, a three-dimensional file. And then it just goes to the printing. This is the printer program. And what this does is let me make it any size I want. It also hollows the piece, because you don't want a solid resin piece. You don't need it. And those little white things that you see around the side are supports, because when this thing is printed, it's printed from the face back. It's done backwards. So when this thing comes off of the printer, it's those little white things that are supports are attached to the plate. This is the print. I know it's pretty rough looking, but that's the actual print as it comes off of the machine. It's got a little bit of residue on it, because when I take them off, I usually hit them with a metallic wax to see what they look like again. And in this case, I put the wax on, then I took it off before I made the mold. And on the right is a resin cast. It's just a bronze powder in a resin. And then it's cast under pressure, and then it's steel wooled back and waxed usually after that. So here's an example of that piece. And since it's a printer and I can do whatever I want, there's the three different metals, three different views. There are smaller ones that I actually enclosed when I sold these metals. I added the pins. And then the bottom sort of greenish one was just a 6-inch version that I could do, because again, when you have the printer, you can modify things, and you've got a piece. I also printed some of the portraits in the round, so all that is done through the mystery of 3D modeling programs and 3D printers. I think, yeah, that's it. Okay.
All right, give me 1 second here, Jim. That's a really cool process, Jim. I don't know anything about software technology like what you were talking about, but I was telling Jim a few days before when we did a dry run, it's such a beautiful metal you lent us for our Metal in America exhibit, Jim. And I actually handle our tours, our adult and school tours. And I always make sure to point out the metal, point out who John Lewis was, the accomplishments that he had. And then I tell people that it was actually made with a 3D printer, and they just cannot believe it because it's such a beautiful, striking metal. So again, we appreciate you loaning your stuff for our exhibit. It's great.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it, especially. I'm very proud of that Hirschfeld.
Yes, I love that metal as well.
Those were the old days when I did everything by hand, 1-to-1. You know, I could still do that, but I don't think I would want to anymore.
Right. We have an attendee here that asks, is this how work is done at the Mint in any way?
Actually, the U.S. Mint now is almost completely digital. Yeah, it would be very much the same process, except that they wouldn't be doing a 3D print. They would be taking the final file and going right to the CNC machines and milling it in steel, making the dies in steel. Again, that's why I mentioned draft. You have to have, you can't have a right angle on a letter. It can't go up and across. It has to go down it. And what the Mint uses, I think, is a 23-degree draft, which seems like a lot, but when you actually see it, you don't notice it. It just looks like a nice letter. But again, these programs are incredibly useful in production because you can work out all the potential problems beforehand. And you will know from the software. The software will tell you where there's an issue. It's usually, for instance, the draft, there are colored lines. And if the line gets to a red, you'll know that that's not steep enough. That needs to be modified. So anything that would be an issue in production down the line is usually caught beforehand. And if, for instance, we were doing quarters at one time, and I was doing, I think it was the Chickasaw. And all I know is there in the design, there were these 3 birds flying in the sky, and you could see their little feet. Somehow, when they started striking them, there was something that needed to be modified because it didn't look like their feet. It looked like they were just bombarding people. It was a rather stunning moment. So we had to go in and make the legs stronger so that it didn't look like they were crapping. But it was something that we could modify very quickly. You know, within a day, we could go back into production. They could cut new dies, and we're back to where we need to be.
Jim, I guess I have a question. What is the technical name for what these metals are made out of? I mean, I know it's not just straight metal, but there is bronze included in it, or
yeah. This is there's 2 terms. They either say bonded bronze or cold cast bronze. Both of them are a little dodgy because really what it is, it's a mixture of a resin, an epoxy, or a urethane, a colorant usually, and then a certain amount of atomized bronze powder, which is a really, really fine bronze powder. And to make this stuff, they have to sort of bombard it with something while it's actually molten and flowing. It comes out, it's a very complicated process. And when they're done, they wind up with a tiny, microscopic, perfect little sphere of bronze or copper, aluminum, brass, nickel, silver. You can almost any metal can be obviously made into an atomized version. So I did a presentation about this for the AMSA, the American Medallic Sculptor Association, several months ago, and it involves basically, making a good silicone mold, and then when the mixture of the powder and the resins is poured into the mold, and it's pressurized, because when you put 60 pounds of pressure over a mold, or around a mold rather, you do not have any air bubbles. I mean, the trouble with fluids in general is that when you pour them, you get air bubbles. The air gets entrained. When you mix it, air gets entrained just by looking at it sometimes. But this is how the pressurization is the way to prevent any kind of bubbles. So when you take it out, it's just a question of cleaning the seams. Usually it's a two-piece mold, so there's a little witness line around the outside. And then for the Lewises, it's mostly a question of just steel wool, very fine steel wool, and then some colored waxes for the green ones and things like that. But for most of the time, it was just the steel wool, and then once the steel wool took away some of it brought up all the highlights, so that you had all the areas that would look like they would wear by normal fondling, really. Like on bronzes, that's what happens when the areas are lighter. It's because they're touched or they're somehow abraded a little bit. And when that's all done, you just I usually hot wax them, and that's it. They come out looking very good, and they're consistent. I don't have to worry about foundries with bronze that doesn't pour right, and that has inclusions, or that has irregularities in the surface. And it just works for me.
John, were you able to present any of these medals to the Lewis family?
There is one that went to one of the museums. I'm not sure which one it was. One of the African American museums. It just went to the museum as a gift. No, as a matter of fact, I've been trying to find out how to get to certain people to give them to them as gifts. Like John Meacham, who wrote a biography of Lewis, that was a friend of his. I've been trying to find out how to communicate with these people. It's not easy. I had one of the little busts, one of the congressmen, Claiborne, I think his name is. Yeah, Jim Claiborne. He has, whenever you see him interviewed in his office, he has these little busts behind him. And I thought, well, I would love to give him a little bust of Lewis. It was impossible. I went through the right channels, and I even had to contact my congressman to contact him. You can't go directly. He only talked to his constituents. And that never went anywhere either. So it's very frustrating if you want to give something to someone.
Yeah, such a beautiful medal too. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions for Jim? Again, it's a beautiful series of medals, and the production process is, as interesting as the medals itself. So, thank you, Jim.
Okay.
Nope. We got another question. What is the trade name of the resin and bronze powder you use, and who is the supplier?
Okay, I can do that. The resin is it's called an onyx, ONYX, I guess. Yeah, which is the black, and it's Smooth On is the company that makes it, and the bronze powders you can actually buy from Smooth On. Most companies that sell resins will also sell bronze powders. They are incredibly expensive, like to the tune of $22 a pound, which is a lot more than bronze. But you can get 2 or 3 of the metals out of a pound. So, they're not the same weight by any means as a regular metal. but they do have a decent heft, and they certainly look good, and they're not going to oxidize either. The resin somehow keeps the metal from acting with chemicals or ambient things that might change the patina, which is a plus and a minus, depending on how you go with it. But Smooth On is the company that I use, an onyx. I use a fast setting onyx. These things can actually, it's about a 2-minute work time and 10-minute, I guess, dwell time, 10 minutes in the tank. So literally in 15 minutes, I can take one out and start doing the finishing.
Anyone else have any questions for Jim? Well, everyone, again, thank you for joining us for our National Coin Week e-learning series. Thank you, Jim, for sharing your expertise. Very, very interesting process indeed. And thanks for honoring a great American, in my opinion.
Well, I think he deserved it. At least a medal.
Yep. All right, everybody. Well, we have more National Coin Week e-learnings coming up Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Tomorrow we have Jean Stevens Solomon. Should be a treat. She's going to talk about her time at the CCAC and how we honor lesser known stories, but worthy of honoring in our country's history. We have Dr. Harcourt Fuller on Thursday. He's going to be talking about his time currently on the CCAC and some of his favorite medals, dealing in a variety of issues. And then Neil Musanti, who wrote the authoritative reference on George Washingtonia medals. He's going to be talking about some interesting medals in a talk on Friday. So please join us. And again, happy National Coin Week.